Well, believe it or not, 2025 is next week.
It doesn't really feel like
No.
that, but yes, it is. Several new laws take effect in Colorado on January 1st. So to talk about what's changing, we brought in 9 News legal expert Whitney Traylor joining us. Whitney, first of all, thank you for being here. Hope you had a happy holidays.
Yes.
So before we get into the laws themselves, tell us a little bit about the lawmaking process.
Yeah.
A, why do they go into effect now? I guess start of the new year, but B, who passed these laws?
Yeah, so a lot of the laws we're talking about came from the legislature, and some of them were passed in 2020 but don't go into effect until January 1 of 2025. So this is really interesting because, you know, I always tell my students, I'm like, your state legislators are people that you can actually access and have contact with, and they have such an impact over our lives in terms of the laws that they pass. So here, you know, a lot of these laws are passed with the state legislature, but we also get our laws from the courts. When the courts make a ruling and it gets appealed, that also becomes binding law. So anyway, that's the lesson for today on the lawmaking process.
Professor Whitney Traylor.
Yeah, well, specifically, let's talk about the laws and how they're going to impact us and affect us. And the first one that comes to mind is the hands-free bill, because so many of us will be affected by that, right?
Right.
How does it work?
Exactly. The hands-free bill, that will go into effect in January. And essentially, this was already applicable to 18-year-olds where they were not allowed to use their mobile phone while driving. So now it applies to everyone, but you can use hands-free. So, you know, most of the cars now have the hands-free technology, so you'll be fine. One issue here is the enforcement, because it sounds like the police actually have to see you using it. And one thing I was thinking about, a hypothetical on my way over, is if you happen to be looking at the map and have it in your hand, that would, I think, be a violation under the law. But of course, you need to look at that map. So I think they'd say have it situated somewhere that you don't have to touch it.
Yeah. He said, Whitney, we saw you sent that text. So next up, all eggs sold in Colorado must be from hens that are in cage-free facilities, right?
Yes, exactly. So this was a law that actually was passed in 2020 and didn't go into effect until January 1 of 2025. And it makes sense. I'm assuming they were giving them time to actually, you know, modify their ranches or whatever. And so it says they have to be in cage-free facilities, and they have to have at least 1 square foot of floor space per hen. And this doesn't apply to farms with fewer than 3,000 hens.
Oh, interesting.
Changes, yeah.
Yeah, it'll see, you know, just how supply and demand is affected there, because I just went into a Whole Foods not too long ago and they were like, we don't have any eggs, because they already, exactly.
And so I think you will see a price increase, although I'm not sure how many of the egg farmers have already made these modifications, because if not, you will see, I think, more of a price increase.
Let's talk about minimum wage in Colorado going up again. So how does it work if there are different minimums between federal, state, local? How do you know what you get paid?
Right. That's a great question, because it is different. And you get paid the employer. So employers out there, you have to pay the highest wage for whatever jurisdiction you're in. So for example, in Colorado, our minimum wage is going up from $14.42 per hour to $14.81 per hour. The federal minimum wage is only $7.25. So obviously they have to pay the higher, which would be the $14. So that's going into effect in 2025. And it's really kind of shocking to think, I think 34 states have a higher minimum wage than the federal. That means there's a number of states, some states, 5 don't even have a minimum wage, which is shocking. And then several are below the $7.25 an hour, which in this day and age, you couldn't live in Colorado on that, obviously.
And then there's always trickle down for if you're paying your workers more, then that obviously impacts the bottom line as well.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and that's the employer's argument, yeah.
So another change that's coming is securely storing guns in cars. That's a new law that's taking effect next Wednesday as well.
Correct. That's a new law. And so basically it says any handgun that's stored in an unoccupied vehicle, it has to be in a locked, hard-sided container that's out of plain view. And the vehicle must also be locked. So there are some exceptions related to farm and ranch work environments, people with disabilities, antique firearms, things like that. But for you gun owners, be aware that if you're going to leave the gun, which, you know, seems a little more common sense, but if not, it's very specific, like the hard-sided container is necessary.
Yeah, let me ask you before you go, because I feel like I can sense some of our viewers rolling their eyes as they're watching, because there are a lot of folks out there who feel like there is too much government regulation in our everyday lives.
Right.
But talk to them a little bit about the lawmaking process and why this is necessary.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people like that, and even small business owners like myself who have, there's a lot of compliance, and you end up spending a lot of time on administration and things like that. And I get that, but I think my pushback would be most of our laws come from a result of bad action from people, right? It was MCI WorldCom that led to, Sarbanes-Oxley. 9/11 led to the Patriot Act. In 2008, there were all those mortgage reforms in the Dodd-Frank Act. And that was because people when we had the mortgage bust, and what banks were doing was saying, to qualify for this loan, you need to make 100 grand, you only make 50 grand, so we'll just write 100 grand on the application. And banks were doing this regularly. And so then we had this mortgage bust, and after the mortgage bust, because people couldn't afford those mortgages, you have 10, 15 new laws, state and federal laws related to mortgage lending. So, a lot of times it's like, well, citizens, if we do right, we don't have the need to regulate.
About the funeral homes this year. That comes to mind, right?
Thank you. And we were one of the last states to regulate, and it was the wild, wild west, and that's a perfect example. And now we're going to have all these regulations, which we should, right? There should be certain standards. So, that's the argument.
Whitney, we made you do your homework over the holidays. That was rapid fire. You know your stuff.
Good job, my friends.
Whitney Traylor, appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, good to be here.